Buenas noches, boa noite, welcome todos, todes, todas, everyone to El Museo's program for tonight in celebration of the opening of Taller Boricua, a political print shop in New York. We are very pleased to present a panel discussion exploring the role of women artists in the early years of the Taller Boricua and the Nuyorican vanguard arts movement. My name is Rodrigo Moura. I'm El Museo's chief curator. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you especially to Glendalys Medina, Nitza Tufiño, and Yasmin Ramirez, who will be our moderator here tonight. Nitza Tufiño is one of the artists featured in the exhibition. She is also the first child of Rafael Tufiño, who's also another early member of Taller Boricua. And she is an artist with a long history with el Museo del Barrio and several public artworks in New York, such as the one on the 103rd subway station on the train 6 line, on the 6th train line. Also, Glendalys Medina is a conceptual interdisciplinary visual artist, born in Puerto Rico and raised in the Bronx, with an MFA from Hunter College, and also a history of exhibition, more recent, with El Museo and several other institutions citywide. And Yasmin Ramirez is an art worker, curator, a historian, writer based in New York City. She holds a PhD in art history from the Graduate Center, CUNY. Very active in the downtown art scene in the early 1980s as a club kid and art critic for the East Village Eye. Yasmin is a very knowledgeable scholar on the material we're showing on this exhibition. So I enormously thank the three of you to be joining us tonight. So I want to give a quick introduction to the exhibition, an overview to the exhibition as we start our program tonight. So if we can just start with some images. Gender is political, Taller Boricua and the New York arts movement. Of course, gender is political, and so is political, the title of the exhibition, a political print shop in New York. And one of the sections of the exhibition is also titled Political Education, being that the core mission, one of the biggest mandates of the Taller Boricua as an arts organization and as a collective studio, artist studio, created in East Harlem in 1970 with this mandate of really providing education, a political education to the Puerto Rican diaspora in New York City. So we will discuss this a little bit in a moment, but I also wanted to point out to this mandate or this mission of Taller Boricua, right? So as we, this is I should speak a little bit about my own experience with this material for a second. So this is my first exhibition that I curate for the museum. It is also the premiere, not only of me curating shows here, but also the premiere of the program that I've been designing with the whole institution to be the curatorial program for the years to come. So this exhibition was planned for March, and it's finally open at El Museo. So I encourage everyone to come and visit, get your time tickets online, and come and visit this show. It's a historical show focusing on the first 12 years of existence of the Taller Boricua. as one of the most important exhibitions or institutions active in Upper Manhattan since the 70s, right? So gender is political, and so is the whole approach to the show. But if I may just start by saying that Nitza Tufiño was a figure that interested me very much since I started to do research for the show, because she has an ambivalent role, being both as an early member of the Taller Boricua, but then coming to El Museo as an early member of the educational department. So what we have in our screens now is a group of works that were created by her students to be a calendar for the year of 1973. And these are lino cuts that she created, or she oversaw the creation of, using the lino cut technique, and that was then enlarged to be this big sheets of a calendar. So maybe if we see the next image, that is also, I think, a very interesting piece of ephemera that's on display on that same wall, that explores this sort of intersection between El Museo and the Taller Boricua. And that is the flyer that was designed by Nitza to be the publication or the sort of handout of the first exhibition of Taller Boricua had at El Museo in 1972, Expo Rodante, and I read from that flyer. So in order to provide our children, our community with those aspects which constitute our heritage, it is necessary to look at the contributions made by our people, which inherently foster our continuation, our culture, our aesthetics. Creators surround us. So they are part of our lives. They are our parents, dancers, artisans, musicians, painters, etc. So I think that's a very powerful statement that I wanted to share with you, that it's published in this first, the flyer of the first show. The next, so this is where we can see closer some of the Taino imagery that was employed on those calendar prints. Maybe the next image. Also, I think of note is also the presence of very strong female figures being represented in the works of, in this case, next image of Marcos Dimas and Lolita Lebron's figure in a couple of his posters. Next. Que Bonita Bandeiras, Lolita Lebron. That's another serigraph by Marcos Dimas, where the important independentist leader is portrayed. Next. Also, the work in the center of this image is the Portfolio Proletario. That's a collective portfolio that was published as a collaboration between the Taller Boricua and the Centro de Estudios Puertorriqueños, where we can see one poster dedicated, or even three posters dedicated, three prints dedicated to female figures. We can go to the next image where we see Mujer en la Lucha Obrera. This is by Mirna Rodriguez. The next one is Juana Colón by Manuel Otero. Also, I think we can go to the next image. And then to the next again, thank you. Sandra Maria Esteves, that's another important figure that was a Taller Boricua member and was producing prints in this context, also a poet. So the next image, this is another poster where we can see really that this attention to gender, or this discussion of gender, was present. In this case, it's a students' conference that Marcos Dimas designed. The poster of La Mujer Puertorriqueña was the title of that conference. Next slide. And this is another room of the show where I I decided to focus more in sort of non-graphic work and go deeper in the individual expression or the artistic work of 3 artists in the show, Nitza being one of them. So we see on the left the suite of collages titled Máscara de Hilo, the thread mask. And then more in the center, we see La Pareja Taíno, which is a very early piece by Nitza. I know Yasmin and Nitza will cover that a lot, but I also want to mention that this is a piece that was very critical to the early years of El Museo. So we have this beautiful images where it's shown being displayed in the early years of El Museo, you know, exposing the youth of El Barrio, the young people of the Puerto Rican diaspora just being exposed to that image. So we see like the painting being really a critical instrument for fostering, as that statement mentions or put it in word. And the image next to it, it's yes, thank you. It's sort of a monoprint frottage by Marcos Dimas, made in the petroglyphs, and that's a depiction of the goddess, the Taino goddess Arabe, that it was also used as a very important symbol in the early stationery branding logo of El Museo. So this is just a very brief overview. I hope it serves as an appetizer for those joining us again. And thank you all our speakers again. And then now I'll pass to Yasmin. Thanks.
Yasmin Ramirez here, presente. Buenas tardes. So can we perhaps put the last slide on display? Thank you. So first of all, I just want to give my thanks to El Museo and to Rodrigo in particular for such an eye-opening exhibition. I mean, I've been working with Taller Boricua and El Museo since the late 90s and have looked at this work many times, have put it up many times, but you've made it, and I think a lot of other people, in a new light. You've given it such beautiful aesthetic presentation. And so my comments have to do with what we gain and lose, what is revealed, but also concealed by the aesthetics of the portrayal of Taller Boricua in your exhibition, which is gorgeous. So this room in particular gave me pause because I liken it to a room of Los Tres Grandes of the Nuyorican movement of Taller Boricua. You have Jorge Soto Sanchez, whose work we don't see in this installation. You have Marcos, right, the founder of Taller, and then you have Nitza Tufiño, the first female member, and truly one of the great artists of this movement. And it gives one the impression, the overall exhibition, with Nitza's prominence, as well as the number of women who are mentioned, maybe not represented, but in the memorabilia or in the posters, we see that there were a number of women in the taller throughout the 70s and early 80s. Let me just name them all, say their names. Besides Nitza Tufiño, we have Sandy Esteves, Milna Rodriguez, Esperanza Martel, Wanda Quiñones, Jacqueline Biaggi, Olga Alemán, Miriam Hernandez, Gloria Rodriguez Calero, Sharon Frazier, Aletta Bass, and perhaps others whom I'm not aware of, but these are some of the artists that came to mind when I spoke to some of Taller Boricua's members. So we have posters. We have one very prominent female artist in Nitza, when we could almost say there was maybe a third of the Taller Boricua was dedicated to women. And of course we have, most importantly, we have the many images of women, central of which is the goddess of creation, the Taino goddess of creation, Atabex, becomes an important figure in popular culture as a result of the work, I think, of Taller promoting this Afro-Taino imagery. We have copious images of Lolita Lebrón, a political leader, of Julia de Burgos, who becomes a real important figure, as important a figure really, I would say, well, she becomes as important to us as Lolita Lebrón in terms of a feminist icon for young women, right? So we have Lolita on the political front and Julia de Burgos really working on the aesthetic front as a poet. So overall, we get the impression that yes, you know, Taller Boricua very much promoted art by women, pride in Puerto Rican female production. And it did, but at the same time, we have to think about the position of women within Taller over these past 50 years. And when I talked to the women at that time, for example, when I talked to Sandy Esteves, she would tell me that, well, she had a little space in the Taller alongside Jorge Soto Sanchez. And one of the reasons that she gave up being an artist and went into poetry was a sense that she would never really acquire that big space that men had at the Taller and that men have had throughout history in the world of art. And so in terms of the way women are positioned on a day-to-day basis at the Taller, they were present. But with the exception of Nitza, there was no commanding female presence at the Taller that could take on the men who really ran the day-to-day operations of the Taller Boricua. And that is not to say that they were machista, although some would say sometimes they were, but that we cannot underestimate the real social struggle women artists had at the time. And so what we find is that the women who stayed in the art world really moved either to writing or they became administrators of spaces. But in terms of being able to dedicate that practice, daily practice of becoming a renowned artist, that was still in the 1970s a rare opportunity that someone like Nitza, who is royalty for us Puerto Ricans, she comes from a royal artistic family. Yes, she can make that happen, but for the faults of women, it was a real struggle. The second thing that I would say is that maybe Puerto Rican women artists kind of participated in that, because if we look at the fact that there was never really much of an organization of women, unlike in, let's say, the Young Lords, where women got together and confronted the sexism, we did not have a gathering of women at Taller Boricua saying, we need more and we demand more. And so it's not really until the 90s that the Puerto Rican women or Latinx women artists really forming feminist groups. So that's another thing that I'm hoping that Nitza is going to address, which is what was it like on a day-to-day basis being a Puerto Rican woman artist? What was it like among your colleagues? What were your grievances and what were your celebrations?
Okay, I'm gonna read something quickly and then I'm gonna talk about, so that we don't go over the minutes that you gave me. Good evening, buenas noches. As the first woman artist and considered a co-founder of Taller Boricua and co-founding of el Museo del Barrio, it is bittersweet to sit here with you over the things called Zoom and virtual presentation of this important panel. As I toured the exhibition the day it had its live opening, I was moved to tears, particularly because for the first time together, I felt the presence of my compañeros en el arte y la lucha who are no longer with us, but are so very present and who are in our blessed memory. I will call them the first generation of Taller Boricua. Thank you, Dr. Yasmin Ramirez, Glendalys Medina, y Rodrigo Amaro, and Patrick Charpanel, Executive Director of el Museo del Barrio, and the extraordinary trustees of the Board of Directors under the leadership of Maria Eugenia Mauri, and the generosity of Chair Emeritus Tony Becharra, and loving support of Chair Emeritus Susana Torreya. I was told that I have about less than 5 minutes to speak about my art activism and political involvement within a
You have
10
more.
minute span. Without span of discussion with Yasmin, it is impossible to do 1 minute or decade for the 50 years of my work as an artist. First, I will state that I believe in the importance of mentorship. I have been privileged to be mentored by who are considered to be the best Puerto Rican and distinguished artists and scholars of our culture, who were also father figure to me and saw me grow up. Lorenzo Mar, who advised me to settle in New York upon obtaining my BFA from the Academia San Carlos, Universidad Autónoma de México. Miguel Paul, who gifted me my first box of oil paints when I was 10. Antonio Maldonado, my godfather. Don Ricardo Alegría, who introduced me to the history of the Taino culture and artifacts, and is directly responsible for my love to honor that indigenous Caribbean culture that is so much Boricua. Jack and Irene Delano, who was also my teacher and my high school teacher in silkscreen. While in Mexico, my most important mentor was David Alfaro Siqueiros, who steered me to muralism, and Leopoldo Mendez, the director of the Academia San Carlos. And of course, my very own father, Rafael Tufiño, who together with Carlos Osoro became mentor as well to the original founding artists of Taller Boricua. The two most important women in my life were my grandmother, Goyita, who raised me together with my mother, Lucha, who was mentored by Frida Kahlos and part of the Fridos in Mexico City, where she met my father, Tefo. I was advised by Tufiño and Osorio, what El Taller Boricua, to become an ambassador to Taller by assisting other cultural institutions in formation. That is how I became part of El Museo del Barrio. I am honored to have been able to bring its first director, Marta Moreno Vega, together with Harry Maristani to Puerto Rico and introduce them to our cultural heroes who embrace them. That is how the first collection and poster for our artists were obtained for El Museo. I am honored to have been able to produce the first mural facade of El Museo when they were located in 3rd Avenue between 106th and 107th Street. My political involvement within El Barrio, particularly my close relationship with Lani Williams, who gave me a studio space and then allowed me to lobby to obtain space for El Taller Boricua and El Museo at the Heckscher building, where El Museo is now. The New York City Parks and Recreation needed to space that El Taller Boricua occupied, and I was able to lobby the New York City Council member, the Honorable Carol Maloney, now U.S. Congress member, to get the present brownstone where the Rafael Tufiño printmaking workshop is now located in 106th Street. I am proud to have also been the first artist and woman of color to get not only one, but 2 train stations in MTA. And this paved the way to our community artists in the world of public art and New York City domain by mostly white male artists. The focus of all my work on canvas, papers, and murals have always included strong images of women within the Taino aesthetic, the Orishas, honored by the Afro-Caribbean people within an explosion of lively colors and associated with the island. My family on my father's side is from El Barrio, and my mother also moved to El Barrio and lived in 116th Street until her death in 1987. My political involvement in Puerto Rico under the mentorship of Juan Maribras and Antonio Correger led my mother to study in Mexico City because she feared that my political mischief, as she used to call it, travesura, will get me into trouble. With the government, yes, I have carpeta thanks to the FBI, so I never returned and followed Lorenzo Mar's advice to make my career in New York. It's not very, how would I say this? It's not easy for a woman to be in the arts, to raise children, because there's hardly no support. So it's really a struggle, and there's not that many fellowships for women, shows or things like that to show the women's work. Even today, to this day, it's very hard. The world out there is made by men. They have the boys club, and it's very hard to find venues or money to maintain to do the artwork. So it wasn't easy for me either, but I am very, how would I say, very strong. I have a strong hold and I keep going no matter what. I raised my daughter by myself and I did my work of art, living in very small spaces. And that's how you get inventive and creative. When you don't have a big studio to do large works of art, or you don't have a press or how would I say, a space, you, with a desk or whatever, you do what you need to do. So that's how I came up with the sewings, with using the sewing machine and doing drawing through silk screen and stuff like that. You can see some of the work there. Also, I honor my history from the Caribbean, you know, my Black culture from the African side and the Taino Indians. And also I can't forget about my Mexican side, which is very strong culture. So if anybody else later on have any questions, you're welcome. You have anything for me, Yasmin?
Yes, Nitza, what I wanted to know was why weren't women artists, in particular Puerto Rican women artists, why didn't they organize their own gallery? You know how like AIR downtown, then you had Faith Ringgold, she had Where We At Black Women Artists. So why do you think that we
because
didn't?
that period, because during that period with all the uprising of the young lords and all of that, a lot of the women also, how would I say, they were not, there was no support. I mean, there was no support within themselves because they were either getting married or raising children. And some of them gave up. They didn't want to be in the arts because they needed jobs to maintain themselves and maintain their children. You know what I mean? The males in their families were not supporting them, you know? So it's very, very hard in that sense during that period. And also you have to be, I mean, there's always, you had a taller, everybody worked during the day, you know, doing their artwork or whatever, or activism or whatever. But nighttime, you know, people used to open the bottle and drink and stuff like that. And a lot of women had to go home and take care of their children. So, you know, it's very, very hard. Why did a lot of women didn't get together and for an organization? And it's very hard. None of them had that kind of push to do that because their priority was their immediate self and family and their children. So with me, I'm a pushy person. So even though, I mean, I got married, got divorced, but I had a child. So, you know, I will work very hard and then go home. Many, many times, you know, nighttime, even when Jorge was for a while homeless, he used to come and stay with me in the village at night. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, it's very, very hard. It was very hard at that time. You know, now maybe you have more women being supported by their husband or giving them child support for their children. You know, a lot of these women, they raise the kids alone and they have to maintain them. You know, the men just had them and they walked out and they left, you know. So it's a very hard time, the 70s, the 80s, even the 90s, you know, even today, it's very, very hard. You know, you want to study, you know, art or whatever. That's why also a lot of young people, they want to be artists, but then their parents tell them, no, you got to choose a profession. They don't consider art as a profession. You know, that means, okay, so you're going to be an artist. You become a curator, an art historian, and all of that. So that's one of the reasons, you know. I mean, it's hard. It's not easy, Yasmin. It's not easy.
One more question, and then we're going to move on to.
Before you do, can I just interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
I forgot to mention when I was presenting before that our attendants tonight should send their questions on the chat box, on the Q&A box actually, and I will ask them at the end of the session, towards the end of the session. Thank you.
Okay. Nitza, one more question about the 70s in particular. Do you think it was any better if you had stayed in Puerto Rico? Do you think it was better for women artists there than here, or?
Well, you can't, no, you know what, let me explain something to you. You cannot compare me to the other woman in Puerto Rico because I come from I knew everybody in Puerto Rico, okay? I grew up with all those people. I grew up with the poets, you know, I grew up with the musicians. I grew up with all those people. One of the reasons why I stayed here and I didn't make my career in Puerto Rico is because my father is very well known and everybody knows him, and then it would have been great for me. I would have gotten a lot of opportunities, but that's not what I wanted for myself. I wanted to discover myself in my art and as a person. So that's why I stayed in the United States, and that's why I stayed so long in El Barrio. You have to understand also this racism. Racism is very, very hard, you know, the most of the institutions, the museums, you know, even with Puerto Rico, you know what I mean? We are here. You don't. The first time that they ever included artists for a show was the Smithsonian, when Carmen Ramos did the show. You know what I'm saying? Before that, that never happened. When I worked for El Museo, all I did was trying to get things from Puerto Rico and open the doors here with institutions, which we did when we did the Metropolitan show with Hoven. And the one that opened the doors to that was Don Ricardo Alegría. I had a very good relationship with Hoven. Also with the National Endowment, with Nancy Hanks. You know what I mean? So, you know, for a young person now, people come from Puerto Rico and they do their masters here. In Colombia, they go to Pratt, you know, and then they go back to Puerto Rico. You know, unless some of them decide that they want to stay here, but everybody is now concentrating in their careers. Not like if you concentrate in your career as an artist and then you want to push other artists like I do. When I was in the selection committee and with Friends of Puerto Rico, Caimán, who later became Mocha, and Susana was part of that selection committee that I brought her in and she met Nilda Peraza. You know, we pushed, let me tell you, because we were in Soho and that was an alternative to El Museo del Barrio having a gallery in Soho. What happened? There were 4 artists that really made it out there. Cruz Azaceta, Felix Torres Garcia, Ana Mendieta, Arnaldo Roche. You know what I'm saying? So, and that was during the 80s. So, you know, why so not, you know, Ana Mendieta, you know, Cuban. Those artists were Cuban that came through Peter Pan. So why young people, you know, now there's more of them coming here and going back to Puerto Rico. There's a lot of things happening in Puerto Rico, even though we're a colony, you know what I mean? They're trying to make it and stuff like that. But here in the States, because of racism and trying to get into the mainstream, you know, you cannot get into the mainstream of the American art. It's very hard. Very hard, very difficult. You know what I mean? I mean, they always see us as ethnic. We're doing ethnic work. You know what I mean? Because we do Taino, we do this, but they don't see the abstractions. They don't see the whole situation. You know what I mean? So.
Gracias. Glendalys.
Yes.
Yes. Give us some science, Glendalys.
I'll give you some science. Well, my name is Glendalys Medina, and I am not affiliated with Taller Boricua, but I have I would guess well, now a more profound knowledge. I really love the exhibition. First, thank El Museo for inviting me and everyone on the panel and everyone in the audience. It was the first time I've seen a lot of the work in person. Like I've never seen Marcos Dimas. So for me, it was like a very beautiful treat to get to see this work and get to see people that maybe a 14-year-old Puerto Rican doesn't even know existed. Like you speak to young people and they don't know who, you know, Lita Lebron was, or Pedro Avisos Campos, or Julia de Burgos. Like they don't know these people existed. And I think it's very important to push that forward because, you know, when I grew up in New York, there were a lot of Puerto Ricans around me, but you know, there were very few Puerto Ricans in grad school and very few Puerto Ricans getting a master's at Hunter. So it's a very different experience to be, get to encounter this type of work and get to have it become a part of me. I mean, it took me a really long time to identify as a Nuyorican because for me in my house, being a Nuyorican was seen as a derogatory term. So when the Nuyorican Poets Cafe came about, when I became aware of it in the 1990s, it was very significant to me because it was the first time I heard my voice being spoken aloud. Not my voice, but a voice just like mine. And it became influential in my practice. I'm gonna share a little bit of images with you guys now, if that's possible. You can start sharing. So someone is sharing something. Okay. I'm just gonna show you a little bit of my work and explain to you like my interest. So I'm interested in hip hop culture, mainly because salsa music was very important in my family. And I grew up listening to hip hop. I grew up listening to Latin Boogaloo and all this type of different variations of implementing different instruments into salsa. And so I created work that had to do with hip hop culture. So I grew up like maybe 7 minutes away from Cedric Avenue. I grew up going to jams. I have siblings that are a great deal older. They were teenagers at this time. I was 7, 5. And so it was always around. And so hip hop, modernism, and the history of Puerto Rico, Taínos imagery, that all gets incorporated in my work. This is a self-portrait. So you see there, I'm using a coquille. So I use Taíno imagery. And to both show not only that I'm Puerto Rican, but this kind of longing that happens when you're in New York for this island. And you're kind of like raised to have this longing. I was raised to have the longing. I went to Puerto Rico when I was 17 years old and got smacked in the face with an identity crisis. I was told I wasn't Puerto Rican. And I grew up thinking I was Puerto Rican. So to be called Nuyorican or to be called anti-nationalistic was very hurtful to me. So this is my version of, you know, the Puerto Rican couple. This is my mother, Miss Puerto Rico. And I use a lot of craft in my work, things that I saw growing up. My uncle was a craftsman. He did a lot of string art and that's how he made his living. And I grew up looking at that and and in my work, I tried to incorporate not only modernism by deconstructing a boombox and creating my own visual language. That's what you see, all these images. It's me creating my visual language, but also trying to incorporate all the facets of my identity into that visual language. So not just using deconstruction, but using deconstructions on what's quote unquote deemed an American, African-American object, the hip hop icon, the boombox. And then, you know, throwing Taíno imagery on there because of my longing and also my history of being a Puerto Rican, but also the relationship between carving something in a stone and writing something on a wall. And that to me is like an activation of like creating space. And I think that's what the Nuyorican movement is really about. I'm gonna create my space now. Now it's time for me to create the space you're not allowing me to enter. And I think it comes from a very revolutionary thought and from the nationalist movement. And that's why for me, Julia de Burgos was so important to me. I remember the first time I read her, I thought to myself, oh my God, how did I not know this person existed? And and she gets overlooked except for people that know her. It's like she's not in the mainstream, yet she has such a specific and particular voice that speaks to a plethora of different people, not just Puerto Ricans. So I'm gonna stop gushing over Julia de Burgos for 5 seconds. And so this is my father. And so it's not only the Taíno imagery that I use a lot of domino sugar because of the history of domino sugar and its relationship to Puerto Rican identity. So this is a piece I call Capicu. and it uses refined domino sugar to kind of explain the experience that Puerto Ricans have, which is, so capicu is a term used in Puerto Rican dominoes where you close both games with one chip, with one tile, but it can never be a double. So I made all the double and the misnomer is on purpose because that's the way I feel. I feel like I have a double identity yet, and I have two options. I could be the American citizen, or I could be, you know, property of the United States of America, but I'm never really winning either one. Yeah, and that's how I think about the Nuyorican experience, like being a multitude of different identities, but not really feeling like a winner.
Mm.
Yeah. So I'm ending my presentation. I think it's time for questions. I think I stayed on time. Rodrigo, I'm giving you the mic. I'm gonna stop sharing right now.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's been fantastic. I think that the three presentations. I just wanna say a couple of things before. Actually, there's a couple of questions from the Q&A box that I would like to pose to Nitza before. But I want to say a couple of things before, right? So, first of all, I want to thank Yasmin for the compliment. I would be too rude if I wouldn't, right? So thank you so much for saying this about the show. It's interesting because I'm new to this material, right? So I take any criticism or critique you have in terms of revealing and concealing, because I think in a way there's something that Rocio says here that I love the idea of Os Tres Grandes of the Nuyorican movement. So when I decided to do that room with those three artists, I didn't know this thing existed. You know, I had no idea of this. So it's really the evidence of the work that makes it so powerful, right? And also I wanna sort of counterpose or juxtapose this to something that Nitza did, which is this sort of gap, right, between what's considered the Puerto Rican production in New York and what's considered the surrounding American art, right, at large. And I want to say that when I look at that room, I see so much going on in terms of this interplay, right? I could start from what Nitza's doing with her stitch drawings, and I could go to something that for me is very, very strong on the painterly experiment, you know, how Marcos was dealing with painting. And he was really working with the legacy of Abex, or even more color-filled in a way, the stains and dripping, but repositioning this to really serve a discourse or you know, notions of identity and color and race being framed by a different perspective, right? That one of identity. But also, I mean, what to say about Jorge Soto Sanchez assemblage, right? This is just fantastic. And I want to read just a minute here. I know we're tight on time, but the artists of the Taller Boricua cross-reference their native culture research with their researches in modern art and contemporary art, whether the cross-reference was expressionism, cubism, Dada, futurism, or neo-Dada fluxus, or surrealism, assemblage, performance, or happenings, the central aesthetics were found to be the same, that of animism, a way of viewing and responding to the world fundamental to the native culture roots. Their research revealed the native culture metaphysics, wherein the spirit of a thing, object, or action speaks to one, giving the thing, object, process, or action a transcendent, personal, metaphysical value beyond its original function or meaning. That's from Rafael Montañez Ortiz, unpublished essay that is in the archives of El Museo, something that we hope we can publish one day, right? Anyway, but this is so beautiful, I wanted to share with you. And I want to ask Nitza, forward Nitza's So the comment on the Tres Grandes was, of course, after Yasmin's comment. That was from Rocio Aranda Alvarado that gave me the lead. But the question to Nitza is from Abigail Lapon. And it says, Nitza, I was wondering if you could please talk more about the impact of your work, the impact your work had at Taller Boricua when it was founded, being the only woman artist founder or being there on that moment. I mean, if you could talk a little bit about not only the impact, I would say, but also the impact in the work itself.
Well, the thing is that we always make decisions in a collective, you know what I mean? And the whole point of El Taller was not only to search for an identity, and people, young people that used to come in, other very young artists or people that were looking for identity, so we will help with that in terms of history. So most of the work, even though it's experimental, because at that time I was doing experimental painting with oils and ink and polyurethane and stuff like that, and also in silk screen. You know, this was the most important thing, to be to do experimental things. So we were always looking for things, you know, to do. The guys always, you know, I never saw myself, I mean, because I didn't grow up with that thing in my head that I'm a woman, you're a man, you know what I mean? My head is my head, and what I think is in my head, you know what I'm saying? And it has nothing to do with my sexuality. My sexuality is over there, you know what I'm saying? But when you, during that period, you know, if I would have to, well, I'm a woman, I can't do this, or I can't be here, or you know, even raising my children and stuff like that, I was very strict about certain things, you know what I mean? What time I left, what time I came in. Some of the artists used to, because I couldn't be late, to late time, you know, like Osorio was there all the time. He almost lived there. So, you know, they will come and visit me at home, you know what I mean? So we can have more talk about, you know, the arts and what was happening in New York and things like that. And always we were looking, like, for example, me and Jorge with the pre-Columbian thing, we used to go to the Primitive Museum that used to be behind MoMA, the Michael C. Now is at the Met. It used to be over there, so we used to do a lot of investigation. You know, they had a library, you could go there, you could look at stuff. So we used to share on a lot of the work that we would find, what books were being read, what movies we should see. And every Sunday we will have a small show, and we will have Joe Falcon used to come over and play, or Sammy Tanco from Los Pioneros used to come and play music. So a lot of the families from El Barrio used to come with their children, you know, during the day to participate and see the artwork, and also, you know, maybe to get a bite to eat, or to meet the artists and to talk about different politics and what's happening in Puerto Rico, what's happening in El Barrio. So this is what used to happen. These were the activities at Taller. And then many times we used to do shows outside. We were not being accepted to do shows in galleries or museum or whatever, even though there was a lot of picketing in front of the museum. Or like some of the guys went, even Marcos was involved in that, Marimal Bedite, when they took over Hovin's office, you know, and they locked themselves in there. And then this is during the Harlem Renaissance show. So, you know, I didn't see myself, you know, these are the guys and I'm a woman, and, you know, I didn't see myself. I'm just like them. I have a head, I think this way, and you have to say something, I say something. And if they didn't behave, I will tell it to them to their face too. You know what I'm saying? Well, you know, you're being too machista, you know what I'm saying? You know, cut it out. You know what I mean? Don't be like this with other women. Don't be like that with your wife. She's at home, you know what I'm saying? So we were like that. I was like that in that sense, you know what I mean? I don't know if that answers the question, but there was a lot of bohemian, you know, like in the Nuyorican Poet Cafe, when the Nuyorican Poet Cafe, even Pedro Pietri used to come around a lot of the poets, you know, we used to do poetry jams. But going to the cafe, you know, you have to go there, you listen to poetry, you have a beer, you have wine, and you gotta stay till late, you know what I'm saying? but or a jazz jam or something like that. And a lot of women, they can't be doing that, you know what I'm saying? But, you know, I had a chance that my mother was still alive, so she sometimes could take care of my kids so that I could go to these things, you know what I mean? Which is very hard for some other women, you know what I mean? And how you see yourself, you know? So the whole point is that what's exciting about the young people today is like, they don't think, you know, gender. I mean, it's like they're not, they don't catch themselves within that gender situation. And the fact that LGBT got the right to get married and be the same like a heterosexual relationship, and that they can adopt children and all of that, a lot of things have changed, you know, in that sense. But still, there's people that are, they don't understand yet, but it has to do with the generational gap, that I guess as the generation keeps changing, the situation is going to change in terms of the heads and what people think. I don't know if that answered your question, but
we have so much more here sort of popping up that I'm sorry, I need to keep going. I know we are shifting a little bit from the gender is political, just in terms of some of the questions, but I want to make sure I put this out there. So there's both people asking about, Rocio's asking about like, how did the curators discuss the installation, or, you know, the curatorial team had internally or with the artists about the installation, so I can answer that a little bit later. But also there's a couple of questions about abstraction that I think it's super interesting to hear from both of us. So I allow myself to read from Susanna Temkin. So Nitza mentioned the abstraction is often overlooked among Puerto Rican Latinx artists, yet I see it so present in the work, especially in the embroideries that are on view at El Museo. And I really want to, praise those embroideries as much as I can during this talk, because I really love them. But also I think they really talk to a lot of things that were going on in terms of American art of that period, about women artists really being put in front. So I want to, make this quick parenthesis to Susanna's question. But basically she's asking Nitza and Glendalys to talk about their approaches to abstraction and figuration in their practice. And so is Juanita Lanza's question is along the same lines. If you could comment on the use of abstraction in your works. Thank you.
So do you want me to answer first? Hi, Gwendolyn. Well, in my work, I combine realism and abstraction in that sense, you know what I mean? And I like to do different things. I like to work like in prints, I do the same things. And I have different trends, and like the sewing, pastels, whatever, drawing. But I like to combine it together in terms of some of the abstractions. And I like also geometrics, like to deal with geometrics. Like I did a big mural and I did a lot of prints on the semis. The different semis, which are the artifacts from the Taino that they look like a mountain, and some of them they were used, like objects that you could put for agriculture. There were different gods, and I photographed them aerial, geometrically. So a lot of the pre-Columbian there is very abstract in itself. It's not, it's not abstract. So a lot of my work has to do with that. And in terms of politics, politics, I act on it. You know what I mean? I act on politics. I don't do that many paintings, of La Heroína, Lolita, even though I met Lolita. A lot of them, more in Puerto Rico that I met them in terms of politics. But in El Taller, what we tried to do during that period was to bring some of the icons and try to portray them in silkscreen and do portfolios and things like that. And also when El Museo, for example, Museo had a show and they didn't have works of art, then we will have to do something on, let's say, on the, like esclavitud, you know, slavery, you know, how was slavery in Puerto Rico and all of that. So the artists came at hand for that, you know, so we used to do paintings and drawings and stuff like that. And that's how El Museo did the shows in the beginning, you know what I mean? So we try to help each other in that sense, you know. But in the how would I say, in trying to cross over, either there's a Puerto Rican aesthetic or there's a Nuyorican aesthetic. We were trying to create a Nuyorican aesthetic, okay? Like there's a Puerto Rican aesthetic, like there's a Mexican aesthetic, history and stuff like that. So with all the experimentations and things we were doing, we were trying to create our own mix there, like this here. I mean, White Pareja Taína, that is during the time of the Vietnam War, and that's one of the Taíno symbols that I use. And she's wearing sort of like, it's a Taíno symbol, but it's actually a mask that she's using to cover herself from the napalm in Vietnam. And I did that during that period. So it's abstract, it's experimental, but at the same time, it has a political statement about the war and a man and a woman and family. You know what I'm saying? So I try to work with things like that. I did a lot of other paintings. When I did the mural for El Museo del Barrio, which it was in 103rd, between 106 and 107, we did not have a facade, and we needed something that it would show, you know, the El Museo del Barrio is here. So it occurred to me to create murals in marine plywood that the theme was the Feast of Santiago, the Black culture, to celebrate the Black culture in Puerto Rico. And when I celebrated it, not only I celebrated, I made the whole history of Santiago, you know, crossing over in the Alancon, which is a way that the cars used to cross over the Rio Grande. But I also put the woman, because the woman is very important. And I'm celebrating the woman, the day of the woman, because they celebrate the day of the boys, the men, and the woman. So I depicted there, that is the man. And then the vejigante and all of that. So within all of that, the culture, you try to push things in so that when you look at it, or the Puerto Ricans or people look at it, they relate to it. And they say, oh, that's me, or that's my culture, or I'm a woman, you know what I'm saying? And that's positive. You try to bring this positive into that mix, you know what I mean? That was the whole purpose of doing all the work. So that was like 100 feet long mural that we did in front over there at El Museo. And then Atabex is the same thing. Atabex is a fertility symbol. It's on the Taino Indians. So it's a woman. Here we are, the importance of a woman. She works the agriculture. She raises the children. And she's a woman, you know what I mean? And she gears her families towards where they have to go. You know what I'm saying? So Atabex was very important. Why Atabex? B was part of the staff of El Museo. They said, okay, we're going to have as an icon Atabex in all the letterheads of El Museo, which later it was changed. But if you have some of them, it's interesting.
We have some stationery or you know, ephemera that it's displayed in the galleries that show this. And we also have a very beautiful photograph of the mural that you created for the facade of the 3rd Avenue headquarters in the 70s. So maybe we should go to, I mean, we have more questions, but maybe we should go to Glendalys before.
Oh, how do I use abstraction? That was a question?
Please.
why I use abstraction is because I feel like I'm in between two objects, and there's nothing like abstraction to convey that. And so I use abstraction for multiple different reasons, but I use it as the base because for you know, language is used to define us. Like I said earlier, can't remember who said it, but the language is used to define us. So my practice is really about creating my own language. And for me to do that, I use abstraction and then I build from there. So I break it down to its base and then I try to elevate it as much as I can.
So great. I remember also there's another question here that I think it would be interesting to have a Nitza. I mean, there's someone who sent a comment saying it is important to take into account the cultural mobilization of maybe that's Harlem Renaissance, the civil rights movement, the 1980s guerrilla girls, and history. It is important to account the practices of exclusion and the marginalization of artists of color. The research shows that artists of color are underrepresented. Are you taking into account Puerto Rican studies, the research and promotion of poetry? So I guess I'll ask you to answer that, Yasmin. And also there's an interesting question here that I want to make sure to sort of bundle up here, which says, any connections between the visual vanguard, avant-garde work of Taller Boricua, the experimentalism, and something happening in the city musically, right? So or in other arts, and I know there was like a free jazz ensemble. There's of course the Puerto Rican theater movement, but I mean, I'll leave it to the experts.
I didn't quite understand the question. It was very broad, so I don't know how to answer. What aspect of the question do you want me to answer?
I think it's more a comment than a question, so we'd end up with but I wanted to, you know, take into account because, I mean, to make sure it's represented. Yes.
Well, I start my book with a Harlem Renaissance. Here's something that I can say that might be controversial a little bit, but I mean, one of my conclusions about the Nuyorican movement is that it is so, in the 20th century, the lives of Puerto Ricans and Blacks, and I'm using the word Black because it's not just African American. There were many artists and poets who identified as African American who actually are Caribbean. They came from the Caribbean to the United States, so it's not just a Southern American phenomenon. So the lives of Blacks and Puerto Ricans are so intertwined in the 20th century that it's impossible for me to even begin to think about the history of the Nuyorican art movement without making reference to the Harlem Renaissance, to Arturo Schomburg, and to a lot of parallels that I have seen in the way that the Nuyorican movement evolved and the Harlem Renaissance in the 20s, the New Negro movement, and you've got the Nuyorican movement. There's some differences, but there's also some wonderful parallels in looking back at this redefinition of what it is to be a Puerto Rican in New York and to take pride in how it is that you're mixing 2, 3, and 4 cultures at the same time, because you know we're a mix, we're mestizos, but we're also United States citizens, but we are also quite critical and always have been of the United States. We can't forget that we also are a radical in the United States. So my book is looking at all of these different parallels between ourselves and the African American movement, the Black arts movement, and the Chicano movement in the East Coast at the same time. What I would say about this particular show and about this particular topic that we're addressing tonight is how are Puerto Rican women artists positioned vis-a-vis the larger feminist movement in New York that was going on, a desire to create galleries for women, And that's why I asked Nitza the question, because it always seemed to me to be something that maybe we should have done. Maybe we still need to do it. Maybe maybe we need to have a feminist artist collective that is putting on exhibitions of specifically feminist Latinx art in New York. I don't know, but maybe we could do it one day.
Well, you know what? There was Soho 20. Remember Soho 20?
Yes, I
do. Women's, but it was a white organization, but they gave opportunity to Black and to Puerto Ricans and to some Latinas. So, but that hasn't existed.
It's a lacuna. It's a problematic lacuna in our history, but that's okay. We've done so much more. It's more to do. It's more to do in our community.
But I think this is actually an interesting place to sort of wrap up, because maybe we have more tests ahead of us than we thought we had before starting the panel. So I'm happy that question or that comment from one of our audience members tonight helped to trigger that notion or that idea. But also, I think it's extremely interesting to explore. There's several intersectionalities that we have here. And one thing that I really appreciate you saying, Yasmin, is how the Puerto Rican arts movement really has a cross-section necessarily with the Black art movement in the United States, right? So I'm just to finish with a little Brazilian note, we have Abdias do Nascimento's poster. And Abdias was an artist from the African diaspora via Brazil, who was living in New York through Brazil, right? He was born in Brazil, and had his work shown at Taller Boricua in the 70s. And I think that's that's an important, and we have the poster here. So I just want to invite everyone again to come to the galleries and see the show, see the installation. And some of the questions will have to be answered in the next program. And there will be one, at least another one. And so stay tuned. So thanks everyone again. Thank you, Nitza. Thank you, Yasmin.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Glendalys, everybody. Thank you, Museo. Thank you, Yasmin. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye. Bye. Bye.